Michael Caine spent most of his life playing men who seemed impossible to break. Audiences knew him as the tough Cockney who escaped poverty, conquered Hollywood, and became one of the most respected actors Britain ever produced. Yet, when he looked back on his life, the achievement he spoke about most often was not an Oscar, a famous film, or even decades of success. It was a woman he once saw for a few seconds on television. The story sounded almost unbelievable. One evening, while watching television, Michael noticed a young woman whose beauty immediately caught his attention. Most people would have forgotten the moment by the next day. Michael did not. He became determined to find her despite knowing almost nothing about her. Years later, he would still describe that moment as the turning point that changed everything that followed. What makes the story remarkable is not simply that he fell in love. Hollywood is full of love stories. What makes it remarkable is that the feeling never disappeared. Through changing decades, changing fashions, career triumphs, disappointments, and the relentless pressure of fame, the same woman remained at the center of his life. While many of his contemporaries saw relationships collapse under the weight of celebrity, Michael Caine's marriage became one of the rare enduring partnerships in the entertainment world. As he grew older, his interviews became less about films and more about gratitude. The conversations often returned to family loyalty and the people who matter once the applause fades away. And whenever Michael reflected on those subjects, one name appeared again and again. To understand why he would eventually describe her as the great love of his life, we must first travel back to South London, where a young boy named Maurice Micklewhite was growing up in circumstances that gave little hint of the extraordinary life waiting ahead of him. Long before the world knew him as Michael Caine, he was Maurice Joseph Micklewhite, a boy growing up in South London during years that were far from glamorous. His father worked at a fish market and took whatever jobs he could find to support the family. Money was often scarce, opportunities were limited, and life demanded resilience from an early age. The streets around him were filled with working people who measured success not by fame, but by whether they could provide for their families. The hardships of his childhood left a lasting mark on him. During the war years, London was a place of uncertainty, and like many children of his generation, Michael experienced disruption, fear, and separation. Yet those experiences also taught him discipline and determination. He later spoke about how poverty never made him bitter. Instead, it gave him a powerful motivation. He knew exactly what he wanted to escape, and that knowledge would fuel him for decades. As a young man, acting seemed less like a realistic career and more like an impossible dream. The British entertainment world was dominated by people who often came from very different backgrounds. Michael carried a strong working-class accent, lacked influential connections, and faced constant reminders that he did not fit the traditional image of a leading man. More than once, people suggested that he should lower his expectations and pursue something safer. But there was a stubbornness in him that would become one of his defining characteristics. Every rejection seemed to strengthen his resolve. He studied actors he admired, worked wherever he could, and slowly built experience through small roles. The path was frustratingly slow. There were periods when success appeared no closer than it had been years earlier. Yet he continued moving forward, because he believed that persistence could eventually overcome almost any obstacle. Those difficult years shaped the man he would become. They taught him the value of loyalty, the importance of stability, and the danger of taking good fortune for granted. Long before he became wealthy or famous, Michael had already developed a deep appreciation for simple things that many successful people overlook. Family mattered, trust mattered, having someone beside you mattered. Ironically, those lessons would prove just as important as any acting class. Because when fame finally arrived and transformed his life beyond recognition, it would not be talent alone that helped him navigate the chaos. It would be the values he carried from his working-class upbringing. And as his career began its extraordinary ascent during the 1960s, he was about to discover that success could bring everything he had dreamed of while also creating challenges he never expected. By the early 1960s, years of persistence were finally beginning to pay off. Michael Caine was no longer simply another struggling actor searching for work. Directors started noticing something unusual about him. He did not look like the polished leading men who had dominated British cinema for decades. His voice carried the unmistakable sound of South London. His manner was direct, and there was an authenticity that audiences immediately recognized. Instead of trying to hide where he came from, he turned it into his greatest strength. The breakthrough arrived with a series of performances that changed everything. Suddenly, producers who had once overlooked him were offering major roles. Films such as Zulu and later Alfie transformed him into one of the most talked-about actors in Britain. Success came quickly, but it was not accidental. Behind every headline were years of rejection, disappointment, and determination that most people never saw. Michael understood better than anyone how fragile success could be because he had spent so long living without it. As his profile grew, so did the demands on his time. Interviews, premieres, film shoots, and international travel became part of everyday life. The young man who had once worried about paying bills was now moving through a world filled with celebrities, influential producers, and endless opportunities. Hollywood began paying attention. Before long, he was no longer simply a British star. He was becoming an international one. Yet fame brought complications that money could not solve. The more successful he became, the more difficult it was to maintain a normal life. Relationships often struggled under the pressure of constant travel and public attention. The entertainment industry could be exciting, but it could also be lonely. People appeared and disappeared quickly. Friendships changed. Priorities shifted. Many actors found themselves surrounded by crowds while feeling increasingly isolated. Michael experienced some of those challenges himself. Like many ambitious young men, he devoted enormous energy to building a career. The pursuit of success often leaves little room for balance, and there were periods when work seemed to dominate everything else. Looking back years later, he would openly acknowledge that fame came with costs that were not always visible from the outside. Then, just as his career was reaching new heights, an unexpected moment occurred. It was not during a film shoot. It was not at an awards ceremony. It was not introduced by an agent or arranged by a studio executive. One evening while watching television, Michael saw a woman whose image stayed with him long after the program ended. Most people would have dismissed the feeling as a passing attraction. Michael could not. Without realizing it, he was about to begin the most important relationship of his life. The woman Michael Caine saw on television was Shakira Bosch, a young model who had been born in what was then British Ghana. The moment lasted only seconds. Yet, Michael later admitted that he was immediately captivated. There was something about her that he could not forget. At a time when he was surrounded by beautiful actresses, glamorous social events, and countless opportunities to meet people, it was this woman on a television commercial who captured his attention. What followed has become one of the most famous stories of his life. Determined to meet her, Michael began asking friends and contacts if anyone knew who she was. The search was not easy. Unlike today, there was no internet and no simple way to identify someone from a television appearance. For a period of time, he knew almost nothing about her except what he had seen on the screen. Yet, he continued searching because he felt something pulling him towards her. Eventually, he was introduced to Shakira, and reality proved even better than the image he had carried in his mind. Their first conversations revealed a woman who possessed far more than beauty. She was intelligent, confident, calm, and grounded in ways that immediately impressed him. Michael had spent years navigating the unpredictable world of entertainment. Shakira brought a sense of stability that felt increasingly rare in his life. Their relationship developed during a period when Michael's career was accelerating rapidly. Film offers continued arriving. Public recognition was growing, and the demands of fame were becoming greater every year. Many relationships struggle when one partner suddenly becomes a global celebrity. Yet from the beginning, there was a sense that this partnership rested on something deeper than glamour or public image. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company and shared values that extended far beyond the entertainment industry. Michael would later speak openly about the profound impact Shakira had on him. He often described her as the person who helped him become a better man. Before meeting her, much of his energy had been focused on career ambitions and professional success. After meeting her, his priorities gradually changed. The future was no longer simply about films and achievements. It became about building a life together. When they married in the early 1970s, few could have predicted just how enduring the relationship would become. Hollywood history is filled with romances that burned brightly before disappearing. Michael and Shakira followed a very different path. Decade after decade, they remained together while countless other celebrity relationships came and went. Their marriage became one of the rare examples of lasting commitment in an industry often associated with instability. Yet even the strongest relationships are tested by success. As Michael's fame expanded across the world, new pressures emerged. The demands of work, travel, and celebrity life created challenges that would force both of them to make sacrifices. And in the years that followed, Michael would come to understand that love is not measured during easy times. It is measured during the moments when life pulls two people in different directions. By the time the 1970s and 1980s arrived, Michael Caine had become one of the most recognizable actors in the world. His films were reaching international audiences. Hollywood studios were competing for his time, and his schedule was often relentless. Success brought wealth and admiration, but it also demanded a price. Long periods away from home became common, and the balance between career and family was not always easy to maintain. Michael later admitted that there were moments when work consumed too much of his attention. The entertainment industry rewards ambition, and few people understood that better than someone who had spent years fighting to escape poverty. Opportunities that once seemed impossible were suddenly appearing one after another. Turning them down felt difficult. Like many successful men of his generation, he often believed he was working hard for the benefit of his family, even when that work kept him away from them. Yet Shakira remained a steady presence throughout those years. While fame transformed almost every aspect of Michael's public life, she provided continuity and perspective. Friends who knew the couple often remarked that she seemed largely uninterested in the celebrity culture surrounding them. She understood the demands of his profession, but refused to allow fame to define their marriage. That ability to remain grounded became one of the foundations of their relationship. As the years passed, Michael began speaking more honestly about the mistakes he had made. Success had given him extraordinary opportunities, but it had also created moments he could never recover. Time lost is the one thing fame cannot buy back. In interviews later in life, he occasionally reflected on how easily careers can dominate everything else if people are not careful. The older he became, the more he valued ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant. One of the most revealing aspects of Michael's later interviews was the absence of grand romantic language. He rarely spoke in dramatic terms. Instead, he described gratitude, companionship, and loyalty. The qualities he praised most in Shakira were not the qualities usually celebrated in celebrity magazines. He talked about trust. He talked about stability. He talked about having someone who remained beside him through every chapter of life, including the difficult ones. That perspective became even more important as age brought new realities. Careers eventually slow down. Public attention shifts to younger generations. Friends disappear. The excitement of fame becomes less important than the people waiting for you at home. Michael seemed to recognize this truth more clearly with each passing year. While many actors spent their later lives reflecting on lost opportunities, he often reflected on how fortunate he had been to find the right person and hold on to her. Looking back, he appeared to understand something that had taken decades to fully appreciate. The greatest achievement of his life was never a film role, a box office success, or an award sitting on a shelf. It was the relationship that survived everything fame could throw at it. And as he entered the later chapters of his life, that realization became the lens through which he viewed nearly everything else. As Michael Caine grew older, the tone of his interviews began to change. The energetic young actor, who once spoke about ambition and opportunity, gradually became an elder statesman of British cinema. He had little left to prove professionally. The awards had been won, the iconic performances had been delivered, and his place in film history was secure. What interested him more was understanding what truly mattered after a lifetime in the spotlight. Again and again, his reflections returned to the same conclusion. Success was valuable. Recognition was rewarding. But neither could compare to sharing a life with the right person. Michael often spoke about Shakira not as someone who stood beside his success, but as someone who helped make that success meaningful. Without her, the achievements would have looked very different. The films would still exist, but the life behind them would not have been the same. There was a humility in the way he described their relationship. He never presented himself as the perfect husband or their marriage as a fairy tale untouched by difficulty. Instead, he acknowledged that long relationships require patience, compromise, and commitment. Those qualities rarely make headlines. Yet, they are often what determine whether a relationship survives for decades or disappears after a few years. As friends and contemporaries passed away, Michael gained a perspective that only age can provide. He had witnessed the extraordinary highs and painful lows of the entertainment world. He had seen careers rise and collapse. He had watched people chase success for their entire lives only to discover that success alone could not provide happiness. Those experiences reinforced his appreciation for the stability he had found with Shakira. Perhaps that is why his story resonates with so many people, particularly those who have reached later stages of life themselves. It is not merely a story about romance. It is a story about recognizing what remains when much of the noise has faded away. Fame is temporary. Public attention is temporary. Even professional achievements eventually become part of history. The people who stay beside us through decades of change are often what matter most in the end. For Michael, Shakira became that constant presence. The woman he once saw briefly on a television screen became his partner through triumphs, disappointments, aging, and everything in between. What began as a moment of curiosity evolved into a lifetime of companionship. Looking back, he seemed less amazed by his own success than by the fact that one chance encounter had led to such an enduring bond. And when people asked him about the greatest blessing of his life, his answer was often remarkably simple. Not a film, not an award, not even a career that spanned generations. It was the woman he searched for all those years ago and never stopped loving after he found her. In the final chapters of his life, Michael Caine came to represent something increasingly rare in modern celebrity culture. He was not simply a great actor. He was proof that lasting love could survive fame, wealth, distance, and the relentless pressures of public life. While audiences celebrated the characters he brought to the screen, the story that seemed to matter most to him happened away from the cameras. The journey from a poor boy in South London to one of Britain's most beloved actors is extraordinary on its own. Yet, Michael's life carries another lesson that may be even more powerful. Success can open doors, create opportunities, and change circumstances. But it cannot replace companionship. It cannot replace loyalty. And it cannot replace the comfort of knowing that someone has chosen to walk beside you through every season of life. When Michael reflected on his greatest achievements, he rarely sounded like a man counting awards or measuring box office numbers. Instead, he sounded like someone who understood how fortunate he had been. Fortunate to find love, fortunate to recognize it when it appeared, and fortunate to hold on to it for decades while so much else around him changed. Perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate far beyond the world of cinema. Most people will never become film stars. Most people will never walk red carpets or win prestigious awards. But many understand the longing to find one person who remains constant while the rest of life moves forward. In that sense, Michael Caine's story is surprisingly universal. The young man who once searched desperately for the identity of a woman he had seen on television could never have known where that search would lead. Decades later, looking back on an extraordinary life, the answer seemed obvious. Among all the roles he played and all the successes he achieved, the most important thing he ever found was not fame. It was Shakira. And for Michael Caine, that made all the difference.